All right, you guys, I do believe we are live. Yes, we are. Okay, welcome. This is the Humboldt Grace Legacy Project bi-weekly meeting. We are a group of cannabis geeks that from all over the world that meet twice a month to. This is the Humboldt Grace Legacy Project bi-weekly meeting. We are a group of cannabis geeks that from all over the world that meet.
Don't forget to mute that one.
Obviously not tech geeks.
I was just gonna say that, Shane. Obviously not tech geeks. Oh, that was kind of epic. What do we meet for? We meet to crack each other up. No, we've been looking for pathways forward to preserve, protect, authenticate, and give value to the legacy culture around cannabis. And we just started with the plant and the genetics. However, we are a very diverse group of about 140 people across the globe. And so we have a lot of amazing resources to share with each other. And today, one of our volunteers, Michael Krawtiz, is going to share with us his direct experience around the federal conversation. But before we open up the floor, we usually go around the group so everybody feels really safe and knows who each others are and does a brief introduction. And I'll start with me. I'm Lele. I'm the founder of Humboldt Grace and the Legacy Project. And I'm out of Humboldt County, and I'm really a community builder. Josh, you want to go next? Just give yourself a brief intro like you do in all our meetings.
Yeah, just one sec. My hands are. Let me go next.
Okay, go next. Wade, how about you?
Yeah, Wade Laughter here in Nevada City, California. Patient for going on 30 years and been very interested in versions of cannabis that have the quote minor cannabinoids like CBD or CBC or CBG and their therapeutic effects for human beings. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Wade. Shane?
Hey everybody, Shane with US Weed Channel. How in the heck are you? If you don't know, Weed has a TV network and we're federally certified. We're global in 145 countries. And yeah, so, it's time to like take all this great stuff that we're doing and let the world know. Network.
Sean?
My name's Sean Stam, so I'm Royal. I'm kind of sick right now. That's why I'm not like my normal upbeat self right now. But I've been breeding and creating my own genetics for many years and making medicine. I make RSO and make it from flower, full spectrum flower, and we have a whole line of medicinal products as well, with a healing salve and bath bombs and tincture. So medicine and unique genetics with unique terpenes are kind of my passion.
Hey, Sean, thank you for taking the time when you don't feel good. We appreciate you, no matter what your attitude is. Josh?
Hi there. I'm Joshua, founder of Conscious Cultivators, longtime breeder and preserving genetics from Humboldt days and up in Oregon, just finding gems and making sure they're around for more lifetimes than ours. And yeah, I started a company once legalization happened, Conscious Cultivators, wholesale, R&D farm and production, and just working on getting good genetics to people out there looking to keep this all going for all of us. We actually just had a development recently and have our own retail outlet opening this next week with a attached cannabis lounge, which will be the first in the Eugene, Oregon area. And yeah, pretty exciting news. I didn't get to share it with Layla yet, but yeah, we're real stoked. And yeah, just keeping the progress going, keeping the momentum going best we can. So we're a family run operation. You know, yeah, that's just how we do it. Thanks,
Get a
you
can
guys.
through. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, man. All right. We got one here, so we'll get on that.
Yeah, make a cool little half an hour documentary about your store opening and stuff like that. That'd be bitching. People would love
All
to see
right.
that.
All right. Give thanks. We will.
Yeah, and if you want to
Appreciate that.
connect for any ideas or anything, just Lele can give you my number or whatever, and I'll just shoot you some ideas if you need them.
Yeah. And actually, I should say our grand opening will be September 23rd, which is my brother, Ethan, who we named the Big E strain after. It's his birthday. And also it'll be an Earth Dance synchronized global event that day. So Earth Dance, grand opening, all coming together at once. Spring, yes, or fall equinox, all that stuff. So it's a good day to just roll it all out. And we're stoked. We're thankful for the support Lele's given us this whole time and connecting us with all you guys. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Very cool.
Thanks, Josh. Etienne?
Hi, my name is Etienne Fontan. I am a cannabis with Berkeley Patients Group. I am a combat veteran. I have founded Americans for Safe Access, the National Cannabis Industries Association, and the Veterans Action Council. And currently I own Bioeconomics Group with Rob Clark in Mojave, Richmond. So very much love what you guys are doing, and I'm here for it all.
Right on. I didn't know that latter part. That's fantastic. Hey, Peggy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, I'm Peggy Jones. I live in Northwest Arkansas, cannabis patient for the past 3 years and veteran. And I'm working with the VAC, Veterans Action Council as well. Thank you.
Sandra, you're next on my screen.
Let me unmute here. Hey everybody, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, let me see if I can take the video off here. Hold on. Hey everybody, I'm Sandy Lepp. Basically started growing in the 80s and got raided in the 90s. And I focus on growing organic cannabis and patients' rights. And 6 plants and 100 square feet. That's the law in California. And basically that's what I try to follow and help people figure out how to make their own medicine. And also the wife and caregiver of OG Eddie Lepp in his last days. That's about it.
And a dedicated volunteer to this project. Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, I want to make sure patients have the right medicine, and the older strains sometimes have things that the newer strains don't. Things get watered down now with the genetics being monitored and bringing things into metrics seems to be hard. So the old strains are getting lost, and I find value in this because it helps preserve the old genetics.
Hey, Carrie. Carrie, you want to say hello? There you are.
Hi. Just sorry, trying to get the video to go here, but it's not. There we are. Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie. I'm a cannabis geek as well and a product formulator. I've been in the industry approximately 17 years, and I'm really interested in the conversation we're having today. And I'm very grateful for this group, for everything that everyone here does to promote change and preservation.
Thanks, Carrie. Miles is using autopilot, but he is here, and Miles is a legacy operator who also went to Berkeley Film School and has helped us with the show that we're doing with Kevin Jodry in editing and producing it. And then Elijah, you want to jump in and say hi?
Yeah. Try to pick a cool background. Hi everyone.
Ruby.
Yeah, thanks. I am a molecular biologist, definitely a weed geek, giant nerd. Growing on and off for the past couple of years, past decade or so actually. and ran a genetics lab for about 5 years after grad school. Now working on the data side of things in the industry and trying to bridge the trust gap that is still lingering from over 100 years of prohibition, and nobody wants to share their data. And as a researcher, that really sucks because we're all trying to just advance therapeutic applications of this plant. So hoping to, contribute what I can here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Elijah. So every week we all, or not every week, every other week, we all get together. And what really makes this project work is that we share resources, ideas, disagreements with each other so we can all do better in all our fields. And today we have one of our amazing volunteers, Michael, doing exactly that. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself briefly before you dive in to the conversation?
I've been doing an internal assessment to try to see if I can righteously say I'm a cannabis geek or not. I'm not. I can say without reservation that I'm honored to be hanging out with cannabis geeks for sure, and definitely appreciate everything that you appreciate as a cannabis geek. But I would have always termed myself a cannabis connoisseur, and I come from that side. And it's funny because I actually met Lele through someone in our little international team. I'm the executive director of Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, Michael Krawitz. And previous to that, it was Veterans for Compassion. And Veterans for Compassion was a organization that was essentially a grass tops mimic organization that I created to implement the will of the cannabis movement. I got the mandate from Jack Hare and Dennis Perone, all those guys. I had a special meeting with them in 1987, and instead of me going to the UN in 1998 under some flag that was already there, I found out that I was going somewhere for the first time for the movement, and I was going to plant the flag myself. I was told, go to the UN and see what you can do. So long story short, one of our team members said, Lele is doing this thing around the Emerald Cup on human rights and cannabis. You need to talk to her. And I'm talking to you, and then all of a sudden you said the word auction, which auction in cannabis circles around me might as well be Michael. I mean, you'll get my ears to perk up as fast for saying the word auction as you would Michael, because I was born and raised in the auction business. I went to my first auction in a bassinet, and my father was an auctioneer. I was at his side, for my entire growing up, my entire life. So yeah, auctions are second nature to me. The sociology of secondhand markets, the intricacies of auction theory. I gave a lecture on auction theory the last time we were on Facebook, and it was fascinating for me to go through and find out that there were several Nobel Prizes given just in the last 10 years in auction theory. Who thought that was so geeky, right? So, but anyway, I guess you could say I'm the auction geek and the cannabis connoisseur of the crowd. So that's my intro.
Right on. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. Today, you're going to talk to us about things that are far from the auction. I'm going to put us on speaker view so we can see you well. Everyone has such a strong opinions in cannabis, and sometimes we don't hear everything that's going on. And I think the descheduling versus rescheduling conversation shows and how strong it is right now that we are coming to a tipping point. But which way is it going to tip, and which way is better? You've been in conversations around this pretty heavily, it sounds like, for the past month or so. I mean, regularly before that, but it seems like it's been all your focus. So I think, where would you like to start with this conversation? What is it that we need to know?
Yeah, so I wrote a couple little notes. I think the first thing is to explain me and why I'm working on this. I think it's always best to understand what somebody's saying if you know why they're saying it. So as I said before, how did I come to meet, and hang out with Jack Hare, right? So I actually started out handing out flyers at info tables for Normal Chapter in Southwestern Virginia. And I worked my way up on two parallel tracks. One track within the VA system that was an internal track through the chain of command of the VA that led to the VA marijuana policy that we created in 2010. And then the external track, which was me working through the reform community, the reform movement, starting at the very bottom, handing out flyer, within a short period of time, running that chapter, within a short period of time, establishing a new state chapter, within a short period of time, working on federal policy and helping to establish such organizations as the Marijuana Policy Project, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Americans for Safe Access, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, etc. I was sort of on the ground floor, I guess. You know, my Air Force career got cut short by an injury, and I wound up on a different track, being sort of re-educated, retrained in computer architecture. And on the side, I decided to do the cannabis activism. I really didn't flourish in the, I did well in grades, but the stress was killing me of trying to do the school, especially trying to do university studies without, at that time, this is in the 90s, before any kind of medical cannabis in Virginia, even before we had established Prop 215. And it was just really hard, basically to try to manage being a medical patient and advanced studies and some of the most difficult, I'm somebody that never took a book home in high school and got straight A's. And here I am, I had the one class in linear algebra, and I was working on a proof with all set theory, and I had the teacher's guide with the answer right in front of me. So I had the question and the answer, and I still couldn't figure this shit out. So that's when it gets really hard. That's challenging shit. And I got into cannabis activism as a sideline because I thought cannabis is just beautiful and wonderful, and I love cannabis. And never would have thought that would wind up being my main thing, but dropping out of school and not finishing that, it just left me at home with nothing to do. My wife saying, why don't you go do something? So this is me doing something. So amazing level of activism that I've been privy to. So to cut another very, very long story short, I am the person that helped the petition to reschedule, renamed ASA versus a DEA in the appeals court in the 2000s. I was the one that won standing to move that from one level to another where it had been stuck for a decade. So that's sort of my little moment there where all of a sudden all my research paid off. A little thing that I wrote was accepted by the appeals court. That was very emboldening, especially since the lawyers have not had a winning argument. We United States passed the Controlled Substances Act in 1971, and NORML almost immediately took them to court with rescheduling petition and a rescheduling argument in the courts. And in fact, the Controlled Substances Act, I think a little history is required, at least 30-second history, and that is the Marijuana Tax Act was the first federal law passed on marijuana. It required you to get a tax stamp before you could dispense it. Any pharmacy that carried it had to have the tax stamp. More important date was 1941, when cannabis was removed from the formulary in the pharmacopoeia, because that meant any doctors that were trained after 1941, their university studies would just refer them to this book with the blank section that used to be several pages on cannabis. That's where the knowledge base sort of stopped. So by 1969, when Timothy Leary challenged the Marijuana Tax Act in federal courts, there really weren't that many doctors left that were actually, pre-1941 trained doctors that were still prescribing cannabis. But yet it was still legal. And if you had the tax stamp, you could still prescribe cannabis and dispense it up until Timothy Leary won, ironically enough, and found in the Supreme Court of the United States that the Marijuana Tax Act was unconstitutional on the grounds that it was self-incriminating to fill out the forms to get the bloody tax stamp. About a year or so went by with no federal law, and then we got the Controlled Substances Act, which created these schedules for marijuana and other drugs. Very much in line with, although convoluted and upside down from, the drug control treaties. The treaty that we had signed 10 years earlier, 1961, our Senate ratified the drug control treaty, what we call the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. That treaty in and of itself meant nothing. For 1961 to 1971, no one even knew it existed. 1971, they sure knew it existed because we created a federal law to implement it. That is when the treaty became relevant in our discussion. As a side note, a marker in your mind. We, again, represented by NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Law, Repeal of Marijuana Laws, I think is what their name was at that time, National Organization for the Repeal of Marijuana Laws. Now they're the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Everything gets mellower with age, I guess. So, but anyway, their initial complaints were well taken. Were some very good court cases throughout the years that you can see where NORML fought with the DEA. Two things that are important to note. One is that when the Controlled Substance Act was passed, the Congress promised the American people that the schedule placement of cannabis, in line with the now found unconstitutional Marijuana Tax Act, was just a temporary placement. And there was this huge undertaking. This is under the Nixon administration. It was called the Schaefer Commission, and that commission would give its results and they would change it appropriately. Well, the Schaefer Commission gave its results and the rest is history, as you might say. It's pretty easy to look up this history. A lot of people talked about how Nixon refused to follow the Schaefer Commission.
Can you repeat what the Schaefer Act did again? Because it was
so the Schaefer Commission was a federal commission that was commissioned, like I said, under Nixon, President Nixon, and it was handed off to Raymond Schaefer. He was the Republican former governor of Pennsylvania, about as conservative as you can get. Here, go look at drugs and tell us what you think. Well, they looked at drugs in an objective way, and they were so taken back by the evidence about cannabis that they put out a special report on it. They titled it Marijuana, a Signal of Misunderstanding. And they were so irritated with the way the federal government hides things that don't agree with the federal government's position that they actually published it as a soft cover book, as well as a soft cover GSA. You can get the government issued green cover, but you can also get a paperback. They're out there. You can find them on eBay still today. Paperback copies of the Marijuana, a Signal of Misunderstanding, the marijuana report of the Schaefer Commission. The Schaefer Commission actually talked about all drugs. It was quite an in-depth study. Just to give you the 10-second study, history of that I think is most important and interesting. They called out some things that were yet to happen. They said if you lie about marijuana and you don't do this or that with marijuana, that you're going to lose a generation, that you'll have an entire generation doesn't trust the government. It was almost like they were like speaking in a future tense. And this was days when you had groups like the Yipsters and the very early days of the cannabis movement, pre-movement, even when it was a social movement and it was directed from every college campus in the entire United States. That was the zeitgeist and the scene at that time. So anyway, the federal government refused to act, just kept it in Schedule 1. So here we are, we have this huge omnibus act, Controlled Substances Act, which deals with all substances that were good or bad. And it's got all this sort of rigmarole and gibberish in it that you got to deal with, legalese. And we're fighting with that ever since, basically. I mean, seriously, 50, 60 years of cases fighting that scheduling stance. And I think it's worth noting that Veterans Action Council has taken it upon itself to kind of understand this history. We've tried to reconnect with those that, around that, like we've had Alice O'Leary Randall come and speak to us on our roundtables and talk about the history of Bob Randall and the medical cannabis movement at that time in the early 1970s and what went on to try to, take the torch in some respects. And I can say, Monday morning quarterback, not to in any way disparage the efforts of 50, 60 years of effort, but what happened in Canada was as a result of good constitutional challenge of their cannabis law. Same thing happened in Mexico, same thing happened in South Africa. And it would have been nice if parallel to the rescheduling effort was a actual proper constitutional challenge, because using the Marijuana Tax Act, for as convoluted as it was set up based upon the novel machine gun tax that had been tried earlier in just years earlier. That's if you didn't know that. The machine gun tax was set up essentially to quasi-prohibit machine guns. They didn't want people to own machine guns, but they didn't want to say they were making them illegal either. So they created a tax, and they gave the taxing authority to a government entity with the instructions not to give anybody a tax stamp. Boom, now it's illegal without making it illegal. It's quasi-prohibition. And they said, oh, well, this marijuana stuff, we kept it out of the Harrison Narcotic Act. The Harrison Narcotic Act was the omnibus drug control act of the day that was passed in 1914. That's where heroin was and lived. But they created a special act for marijuana because cannabis was grown inside the United States. Cannabis was legal. Cannabis was in the pharmacy. Cannabis was well known to be produced inside the United States, cannabis Americana. And that product was a good one. It was a saleable one. And the tariff structure that they created for the 1914 Harrison Narcotic Control Act, I think they would have destabilize the the constitutional authority of that Harrison Narcotic Act by putting marijuana in there. And seeing as the Marijuana Tax Act was the first thing that was found unconstitutional in 1969, and the Harrison Act was still there, strong as ever, I think they were right. That might have been if I'm right about them saying that, then they were right about thinking that. So anyway, they saw the writing on the wall, obviously, and they were already working on onto this act to replace the Harrison Narcotic Act and to get it out of the tariff and the tax structure, the taxing authority of our Constitution. But that constitutional authority is weak. I mean, think about it. One of the first questions I got when I did info tables at those little normal chapter tables was, why, if they needed a constitutional amendment for alcohol, why is there no constitutional amendment for marijuana? And best I can figure, it's because of the treaty itself. The treaty, once ratified, according to our Constitution, becomes the supreme law of the land. It's very convoluted because at the treaty level in Vienna, Austria, at the UN, if you're talking to the UN about stuff in the United States, and you say, well, we would like to do this or that you wrote into the treaty, that we wrote into the treaty, but it conflicts with our constitutional provisions, the Constitution always wins. It's a matter of United Nations policy that any drug control treaty provisions that conflict with national constitutional provisions, those national constitutional provisions prevail. So, wow, talk about, I need my brain washed out with soap just after saying that, the convoluted circular constitutional authority of our Controlled Substances Act has always been weak. But again, that's just a side road. I just wanted you to know, the landscape of where we're at. We live with these schedules that Nixon created, Schedule 1 through 5, that they place drugs that are under control in the treaty in our United States respective Controlled Substances Act. And cannabis is in Schedule 1, meaning there's no accepted medical value, and that it's like kryptonite. You should handle it with extreme care. It's like fentanyl on fentanyl.
So I want to just, with my not as experienced mind in all of this, try to make sure I heard all this right. Are you saying that? So first of all, what I'm hearing is that Nixon created the scheduling, right? Is that what you said? It was created during, so that says so much. But what I also think I hear you're saying, which you and I have these conversations around our constitutional and human rights, is that in the drug treaty, that the U.S. Constitution overrides the treaty. Because I'm dyslexic and I'm getting that backwards.
No, I think you got it perfect. The United States signs into treaties in good faith that we can execute and follow the agreed upon language of that drug control treaty, and it is written into the treaty itself. This came up interestingly. There's I hate to always make things more confusing in my answers, but you should know this. There are actually 3 drug control treaties. There's the 1961 convention, the 1971 convention, the 1988 convention. The 1961 convention is marijuana. That's where cannabis is. That's where we pay attention. That's the single convention on narcotic drugs. But the 1971 convention is the convention on psychotropic substances, think like hallucinogens, psychedelics. And the 1988 convention is all about the organized crime and criminal money laundering provisions and stuff like that nations have signed on to. And in the 1988 convention, when the United States signed on to the treaty, and a little history or understanding of our Constitution, our separation of powers. We have three branches of government: judicial branch, executive branch, and legislative branch. The executive branch, the President of the United States, has the authority given the Constitution to enter into these treaties. Some treaties need to be ratified by Congress. The Drug Control Treaty is one of those. So the President of the United States, the executive branch, signed us into the treaty, and the legislative branch, with an overwhelming majority, a supermajority of the United States Senate, ratified that treaty. Some treaties even require further ratification in the states and through the citizens, but it depends on the treaty. So anyway, this treaty, that was what it took. And the United States, when we signed on to that treaty, that 1988 treaty, we put in a note, normally a place where we put reservations, and a reservation in the treaty would be something that we're stipulating is not covered under the treaty. We'll sign the treaty if it doesn't cover this. A good example is in 1961, when we signed into the Single Convention Treaty, we put in a reservation that we have Native Americans that use peyote, and that the provisions on peyote would be inappropriate given those uses that were well known to us and reasonable in our opinion. Therefore, we reserve that use of peyote per religious, as a religious sacrament will continue on and not be covered under the treaty. It is legal to this day, and it's not a violation of the treaty either that the Native Americans use peyote because of that reservation. And in that same spot with the reservations, they put in a statement, the United States, in 1988, saying, well, we're going to sign this treaty, but know that any provision of this treaty that is in conflict with our constitutional provisions is null and void, that our Constitution prevails. And because they put it in that spot, it raised the question, is that, because I had been thinking it was a constitutional thing. I mean, a treaty thing, that it affected every treaty that we signed in the drug control realm that same way. And that note by the United States made me question that. Is it really just something we have to put in a note each time? Is that a special thing? So I asked one of our top experts at the time, who was at a side event with Bolivia, the government of Bolivia. And he answered the question that no, in fact, it was just the United States making a point. The United States was trying to emphasize that point. It is actually a given treaty clause that any conflict with the member state's constitution. And why does this matter? And why did it come up in 1988? The 1988 convention calls upon prohibitions of certain free speech. So think about the Reagan administration signing on to this new treaty on free speech, having been prohibited. That was a non-starter, and they needed to not only know that, but to make everybody else know that. So they made that clear in their opening statement, where that's normally put in for reservations. Sometimes a long explanation is helpful to really understand how these things actually work. But that should really help you understand. This is serious. Like, there are provisions in the treaty that none of us in the United States would even for a minute think would be acceptable. And those things aren't just exceptions or exemptions or reservations. They are our sovereignty as the United States entering into a treaty under those conditions, that those are judged as acceptable by international behavior, because we've taken the time to put them in our Constitution. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So where are we at now with this conversation?
So I think the key thing that I want to pull up from what you were saying, just in introducing the subject, is I think it's a given in our cannabis movement, a couple of things. One, and I don't think either one of them are true. One is that cannabis rescheduling is somehow in competition with or as an alternative to descheduling. That's not true.
Oh.
And then the other one is, the sky is going to fall argument, which is quite interesting, because the what we would call our cannabis industry, the stock portfolio carrying cannabis crew, they're actually quite pleased with all these announcements, and their stock has gone through the roof. It's the cannabis reform community that's having panic attacks and needing to pull out the old Valium container that they were able to, put aside for the last 20 years using weed. But anyway, yeah, let me speak to both of those. First, the, idea that somehow descheduling and rescheduling are at odds with each other. They're not. In fact, I would very strongly advocate that cannabis rescheduling should be seen as a incremental step towards descheduling, and that descheduling and rescheduling operate in the same universe, but on different levels. And it's very straightforward. The rescheduling is not, this is something that, sort of benefiting from our discussion in our internal leadership forums in the cannabis reform community. I'll answer, I'm sort of answering questions that you haven't asked, but they've been asked. And I tried to, like I said, in my capacity working as an envoy of the cannabis movement at the UN, I really do try to find consensus amongst us. And there is, and I'll show you what that consensus is. But having said that, there are those who are working very diligently in the reform community that have funding to do this kind of work. And they're very afraid that any efforts to work on rescheduling could be seen as somehow them not putting an effort or as much effort as they should be putting into descheduling. That's probably the greatest conflict, internal conflict we have right now. And the way that's actually shown its face is instead of tamping down fears and making them rational, which would bring them down, get rid of the irrational fears of like Schedule 3 as an alternative to Schedule 1. They're actually fanning those flames, in a way to get people to feel more like giving towards paying for, the effort that needs to be done. Let me give you the brass tacks of it, as I started to say earlier. So the rescheduling is not within our control. The rescheduling was initiated by the President of the United States himself on TV. There's no other document or letter that was sent to the AG. We actually, Veterans Action Council, met with the White House like a week before that. And there's some of the language from our meeting that we had with the White House that carried in his briefing. It blew our freaking minds. Like, we were behind the scenes on that, but we didn't know he was going to do that. We were told that the White House would contact the AG because of the treaty change. We wanted to know what was going on with rescheduling, because in our minds, and I'll get to this later as a side note, but we thought and still do think that the treaty change, given our Controlled Substances Act language, should have triggered a rescheduling already, without even the process that's going on now, just an open rescheduling. But anyway, like I said, I'll put a pin in that. I'll get back to that. The point I'm making is that this is a process that's ongoing, that was initiated by the government itself. Any other initiative that we've done since 1971 was us pushing the system, trying to get the DEA to do something it didn't want to do, against the wishes of the president, against the wishes of the FDA, against the wishes of the HHS. This is absolutely landmark, absolutely unique, absolutely different, where the president himself has put this forward, has the HHS and the FDA on his side. The FDA has now ruled on our side and on the side of evidence that cannabis does have medical value, and in their heart of hearts they think Schedule 3 is more appropriate based on the evidence-based what they call 8-factor analysis that they did to assess this. So they've made that recommendation. The recommendation goes off to the DEA. The DEA will make their considerations. A big part of their considerations is the treaty. So that's how we'll get back to that pin I was talking about earlier. But the other facet of this is that the federal change required for descheduling is a whole different beast. Descheduling requires a change in United States federal code that can only be initiated and can only be accomplished through a change in the law in Congress. So legislative branch. The legislative branch has dictated the rules under which the executive branch is now rescheduling cannabis. If you want to see that chain of command, that's the chain of command. The executive branch can go and put us into a treaty, but they can't change the law around marijuana. That Congress can change the law around marijuana, but they can't go and sign this up into a treaty. So this is the separation of powers. And they both have a role. The treaty is woven into our US federal law. All right. So that's the landscape. And it's a difficult landscape. I'll just say two more words about that. And that is, it's going to be hard. It's hard. Legislative action is going to be hard. It's going to take a while. And this is a process that's ongoing right now. This rescheduling is ongoing right now and could conceivably yield a result in real time in next 6 months to a year. There's just no chance in hell of a change in congressional law in that time. I don't think it's feasible or even possible. Feasible maybe puts it out at least a couple of years probably. And they just don't seem to be really on the same page, in the Congress to get it done, frankly. We've been, the Veterans Action Council has been there meeting with them. We've had meetings with the Congressional Cannabis Caucus and met with various leaders, both for and against cannabis on the Hill. Because we feel like as veterans, we can talk to everybody, even people that are against cannabis. We want to know why, and have them hear our piece. As veterans, they generally listen to us. Anyway, do you have a question on that?
Wade did have his hand up. I don't know if he's still here. If we lost him. Up there he is. Wade, did you have a question or a statement?
Actually, Michael's kind of covering what I was going to ask about. You did a great job on the history of the treaty and the Controlled Substances Act, but I'm not sure that it's clear to everyone that the international treaty changed in 2020 as regards to cannabis, and that the US, the Attorney General is going slow on rescheduling cannabis as would be dictated by the treaty if we were complying with it. That's all I had. And thank you, Michael. Great story so far. Go Veterans.
Yeah,
can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so what Wade's asking for is quite perfectly timed. He's asking for I gave you sort of the 101, and then I gave you the bachelor's level, and now you're about to enter into the doctor's level discussion. Seriously, on this scheduling. So, all right, so the DEA has kind of painted itself into a corner because they've been saying since 1971 that to comply with our treaty obligations, only Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 will actually work. Now, more recently, literally like this week, I learned some of the stuff that I was kind of missing on the CBD rescheduling. So what I knew before was most of it, and that is CBD was never scheduled in the United States. Then a CBD product was put up for approval by the FDA. It's called Epidiolex. It was parents and children that demanded this and showed them their medical files that got the government to do the emergency approvals to bring the drug into the country to look at it. And once the FDA was able to look at it, they found it to be safe and effective and not much of a problem with regard to like any kind of abuse potential. In fact, the FDA said they didn't think it belonged in any schedule as far as abuse potential. The DEA came back and said, no, we got to put it in some schedule because of the treaty. And even more than that, because of it being construed at the international level as being an extract of cannabis, we're still going to have to carry with it some of the provisions of Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 that were created around the treaty and around our requirements of reporting and inventorying and import-export controls that we've agreed to in these treaties on these dangerous drugs, of which CBD can be seen as a dangerous drug in a convoluted way, as it's an extract of cannabis. And in 1961, they didn't even know what THC was. The active ingredient in cannabis hadn't been discovered yet. They said the resins and extracts of cannabis. So, certainly CBD, if you take it from cannabis, can be seen as an extract of cannabis and therefore controlled under the treaty. That's what the DEA said to the FDA. They wound up putting in Schedule 5. And this week I learned that what they actually did without me noticing it, because I'm just not that well read on it and not as knowledgeable as some of our lawyers that are working on this stuff. They actually create what my friend called a bespoke scheduling for CBD. in Schedule 5, where they carried with it some of the elements of the regulatory elements of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 and applied it to Schedule 5. Why is this so important? Because if you can't do that, if you can't come up with a special tailored regulatory schema for Schedule 3 for cannabis, then they're going to have to go and put it in Schedule 2. That's what they've always said. It required either Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 to comply with our treaty obligations. So what I'm expecting now, hopefully, is that the DEA is going to come back and say, yeah, in a similar fashion to what we do with CBD, we're going to tailor Schedule 3 to fit cannabis, and cannabis will now be a Schedule 3 as per the recommendation of the HHS. It would literally be the first time, as I understand it, I didn't do this research myself, but literally everybody's confirming that the HHS recommendations have never been denied by the DEA before. So if the DEA doesn't follow their HHS recommendation, it will be the first. So I imagine, like I said, the president has asked for this, the HHS has asked for this, FDA has asked for this. I think it puts the DEA in a different world. And why am I acting like that and talking like that? Because as representative of the cannabis movement, I can tick off 50 times where the DEA has lied to us, where the DEA has delayed us 10 years. We file a paper 10 years later, they say no. Come on. That's just not playing fair. They've really abused their power over the years. So why am I trusting the DEA now? No, I'm not trusting the DEA right now. I'm looking, I think, very practically and rationally at what is in front of us and what it looks like is going to happen. That's what it looks like is going to happen. If in the extreme, and I would call it extreme case at this point, the DEA fucks us again, pardon my French for those who are on Facebook with their children around, this is serious. So let the children hear this. If they go to Schedule 2 and they don't let us have Schedule 3, then that's going to be a serious fight that they're going to have on their hands. And that's going to be if you want to look for a fundraiser for people to go to Congress to change the law, them fighting this recommendation and going to Schedule 2 would be it. That would be the greatest fundraiser they could ever do for the cannabis movement, to put everybody's mind on where it should be, which is funding the legislative effort to get this shit fixed.
So what does that timeline look like?
I'll talk about the timeline in a second, but all right, let me talk about the timeline first. Timeline would be approximate. DEA could come back at any time, really. It's weeks, days, month or two at the very outside with their rulemaking. I can't imagine they're not ready to. They're a lot smarter than I am, and they've thought through everything we've thought through at this point, and they're privy to a lot of the stuff I'm saying. It's behind the scenes, but not it's within their purview to hear everything I'm saying, besides what I'm saying right now. So yeah, I think that the DEA probably has a handle on this and will put out its rulemaking pretty soon in government terms. Hopefully it's a lot sooner than we had a prosecutor in Georgia say the charges were imminent in a case, and it was 4 months later or something like that. So, be prepared for government speak on what imminent means. But I think imminent means even sooner than that in this regard. And then that would start a 6-month clock, because the DEA is going to have a call for comment. And what we're doing, Veterans Action Council is already working on our comment. The comment for Schedule 3 is really simple. It's 10 words. Thank you for your careful consideration. Good job, Veterans Action Council. But if they go to Schedule 2, they're going to find our comment very detailed and very long.
Will you you were saying that hopefully with Schedule 3, they'll have to make some changes like they did with something else. Do you see having a voice in what those changes would be specific to cannabis?
No, but don't fret about that answer, because I don't think it's what you're thinking. So, all right, there's 2 separate baskets of stuff to worry about. The basket I was talking about is a worry for the federal government and not for you, not for the states, not for the dispensary systems. It just literally has to do with what the feds do. If all of a sudden German patients want cannabis that's coming out of Sonoma County, California, that they heard was really great, what do the feds do? How do the feds handle that? And that's the import and export rules and everything in the scheduling. That's what that governs. And in fact, that's what Schedule 3 means to medical cannabis, is you remove the air quotes off of illegal. It's no longer federally illegal. Those are gone. It's now federally legal. And that has a lot of meaning. Like I'll give you just a general purpose meaning. Veterans Action Council spent like 3 months looking at the dormant commerce clause because it's really, really interesting. And what it generally means here in just a few words is that under prohibition, it's the federal government's job to block all commerce, to block all interstate commerce. If you follow the Raich case in the Supreme Court, it came down to interstate commerce. Well, guess what? The minute it's no longer illegal, then their job switches 180 degrees. Now they go from blocking all interstate commerce to protecting all interstate commerce, defending all interstate commerce. That's a very different role. It reminds me like when Sister Samaya got her weed back. The very first time the California police had to hand cannabis back to a patient because the police were violating the Proposition 215, the law of California. And it was like breaking gears off of a tooth, off of a, like, you know, like a watch or something that has gear teeth and they go in one direction. It was literally like watching the police's teeth get ground off of their gear in public view. But that's the moment we're about to see in federal terms. Federal police, the most like awe-inspiring and mean-spirited, the ones that are behind the little people hanging from those, you know, dangling from those choppers, you know, flying over North Country for years, terrorizing the citizens. They had little DEA patches on their shoulders. Those people, those are the people that are going to have some teeth ground off their I can smell the gears grinding from here.
No more camp, like there'll be no more funding for organizations like camp and
well, you know, now you're digging into a different. I can't.
Hey Kev, welcome.
Kim hears this stuff all the time. It's hysterical. But yeah, now you're digging into the, you know, it's funny. There is, you know, one place where the Congressional Research Service, we had actually thought about going to the Congressional Research Service, what was it, about 8 months ago now. Well, Congressional Research Service finally on their own went ahead and wrote about this and released it like a few days ago. And the only thing that I really disagree with them on is they just sort of shrug off adult rec. But adult rec may have some rough waters in between rescheduling and descheduling. Adult rec came in under the coattails of legal medical cannabis access. Legal medical cannabis access was allowed for humanitarian, compassionate reasons. And there really has never been a humanitarian, compassionate argument for adult rec. Adult rec basically stands on the weight of the law that has been created to sustain it. And it's going to be out sort of on its own for the very first time because medical will be legal. Medical interstate commerce will be protected. Interstate commerce and adult rec will not be protected, for example, just off the top of my head. These are going to be profound differences that I think are going to add up so fast that the adult rec programs are going to scratch their heads on why they ever, you know, dissed the medical programs in the first place. They should have listened to the advocates.
Okay, let's see if my brain's kind of like going, what? So what you're so like how many states have recreational legalization? Is that gonna?
It's about 1/3 of the medical, you know, modern medical cannabis access programs. About 1/3 of that number have adult rec programs, and all the adult rec programs are in states that have medical programs.
And so what do you foresee happening with people that have invested billions, you know, millions of dollars into their infrastructure for recreational legalization?
They are quite literally going to wish they had thought more about medical when they did so.
Because why?
Because medical is going to be legal. There's a lot of repercussions that are yet to be seen. I can't even imagine them, to be honest with you. I want to get back to the fears, you know, the fears that people have. One of the most justified fears, I thought, was someone that said, one of our movement attorneys actually said that, well, right now the FDA defers to the DEA on matters pertaining to Schedule I drugs. Is more likely going to, you know, fall more on the shoulders of FDA under Schedule 3. And I give him credit for rationality. You know, he gets a 10 out of 10 on rationality. You know, it's not an irrational fear. But as far as the chance of that being a real problem, I don't give it very high marks. I just don't see it. The reality of it is that the control measures from the FDA's perspective under Schedule 1 are much more severe than Schedule 3. And the FDA has no shortage of manpower. I've been watching the FDA sort of, you know, from the periphery of the you know, inside their perimeter circle, so to speak, for a couple of years, just to get a feel for where they're at. And I can assure you, there's no like clandestine FDA camps getting ready for medical marijuana legalization so that they can come clamp down on shit. The FDA is going to do, I expect, what it's always done and will continue to do, which is if you make a medical claim specifically, you have a product and you're saying this cures this medical condition, they're going to come after you. Before you can make that such a medical claim under our federal law, you have to, if it's going to be put out in public at all, it has to be, you know, put through an FDA process of approval, a new drug application process. And if you don't do that, they have ample FDA police to come after you. And should you produce some sort of product that causes real harm, and there's like a, you know, string of bodies from that product, they are going to follow those bodies to that product and arrest everybody, guaranteed. And they're doing that now. They're doing that, you know, now. I mean, if you want to look at a good example, look at what happened after hemp became legal. The quotes came up. There was no army of FDA to go out there and shut down the CBD providers or the, you know, they went after the ones that made medical claims, and the ones like the 8,000 milligrams, you know, Delta 8, you know, gummy bears and stuff that were causing health issues. They come rather quickly in on that shit. So that's what the FDA has done, and that's what I expect them to continue to do. These state programs that are run carefully under state law, that have, you know, programs that require a certificate or a recommendation from a authorized medical source to participate in a program where you get a card or some sort of certification from the state that you're allowed to use medical cannabis per their program. Many of those states even have requirements as to, you know, what kind of products and what kind of conditions can be treated under those programs. Those are very carefully constructed, very well regulated medical access programs that will easily pass muster under Schedule 3 scrutiny. The fact that we don't fit into the Fed's box is why we created the recommendations in the first place, why you've never seen a problem with prescribing marijuana under Schedule 1. Believe me, if you pull out a prescription pad and you prescribe marijuana under Schedule 1, you will find the wrath from the FDA to be swift and efficient.
So what does that look like? Well, I have a lot of questions, actually. So in your opinion, what does that look like for the, you know, existing farmer that's within the California regulatory process? Will it be like alcohol? Each state has their own rules, or will, you know, like what that's what everyone's worried about, the who we're talking to, who's going to be watching this, I would imagine, is what they're worried. You know, we have a lot of, you know, we just put our entire life into creating a business, right? And then I also want to know, what does it look like for someone who has 6 plants in their backyard?
Well, I'll get to the 6 plants. You might have to remind me, but as far as the first question, my gosh, it's something that we were literally just talking about the other day in the Veterans Action Council. You know, we're a loose group. We're leaderless. We don't have funding. We just do, you know, we've got a lot of members, you know, of the council that have, you know, at any given moment in our little council meetings, we might have 200 years of activist experience. I don't know. There's a lot of veterans. Jack Harrow was a veteran. Dennis Perone was a veteran. I mean, need I say more? So anyway, we have a lot of experience, and we were just talking about this, like now my brain goes completely blank. I'm thinking about Jack.
You all know how that goes.
Yeah.
6 plants, Mike.
Remind me. You're asking about the state. So, we were looking at all these different things that we've been doing. We had Adam Smith on twice on our big roundtables to talk about state pacts. We brought in Debbie Moran from the state. She formerly was with FDA and with the state of Maryland and their cannabis program, to talk about scheduling issues. And we did this 6 months ago. We've had all these conversations on these different things. And, I just was thinking about them, like putting them in my brain at one time. Because again, we don't do that. We don't really have a overarching, plan that we run by funders and all that bullshit. We just do what we want to do based on our heart. And I was trying to do for a moment, just trying to fit it all in my head at once and see what, are these projects all incremental towards one thing? Are they competing with each other? And they're not, they're neither. They're all complementary things in a universe I hadn't even thought of yet. Because like, if you take Adam Smith's work with state pacts, and you got a legal produce, legal commodity, a little legal medical cannabis product that is legal in, let's say, California and Oregon, and California, let's say, has a state pact that they've signed on transfer of goods between California and Oregon that includes cannabis. The day it's rescheduled, that commerce begins. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. And then you've got Carl Olson working in Iowa, who has tried to inspire Washington State and Alaska as well to do an exemption, which is available under a Controlled Substances Act, for states to apply for an exemption for a state action like medical cannabis that's so well controlled and believed to fit well into the paradigm of the larger schema of access to medicine in some at least traditional medicine way. Yeah, that should be absolutely legal. Those little rough around the edges, doesn't quite fit with Schedule III shit would be gone in a second if we can adopt Carl Olson's state exemptions, which is just a matter of your state applying to the federal government under the Controlled Substances Act for the actions that you're taking that are very legal and above boards in state to be recognized by the feds. Once it's rescheduled, they can do that. They should be able to easily do that now, but they can much more easily do that then. So you put all these together and you've got at least a patchwork quilt of national medicinal cannabis access. And what does that mean to the farmer? It means that you're fighting for shelf space on California shelves. What if you were fighting for shelf space on American shelves, on the United States medical cannabis shelves in the United States? All of a sudden, coming from California puts you at the top of the stack. And then you're competing with your others in the state for that spot on a very different playing field than you are and have been under the quasi-prohibition state level, laws. Does that make sense? And then the other thing is that, someone with 6 plants in their yard doesn't make a bit of difference. Not really. I mean, in a practical sense, it doesn't make any difference. In the sense of law, it makes all the difference in the world. The Raich case, the government stipulated that the federal government's authority reached down into your yard, into those 6 plants. I mean, literally, the DEA could come and arrest you, theoretically, for growing 6 plants in your yard. The DEA has made it a rule of thumb, just a general procedural rule of their own, that they don't go after like under 100 plants was the rule years and years ago. I think it might even be more like 1,000 plants today. So the practical reality of having the feds interact with you over 6 plants in your yard is like microscopic right now, and it's going to be gone. It just won't be there. If you're using it for medicine and you got a medical card and you're growing it in your yard, I would expect that to be a non-starter for the feds to want to arrest you or take you to court. They have PR considerations they have to consider, and we as a movement love representing individual people that get attacked by the federal government. Wouldn't be too hard to fundraise for that case. So again, just practical realities. I can't speak in any other hypothetical way other than practical realities. The camp helicopters are going to continue flying over national forests because it's illegal to grow in a national forest, and under rescheduling and descheduling, it will continue to be illegal to grow in a national forest. So there's aspects of what we do now that will continue. I've always said, no problem. We got DEA agents, a small crew relative. I mean, 10,000 DEA agents for 50 states. You know, the number of people that get arrested by the DEA are a microscopic number of the people that get arrested by all the state officials and authorities. But if you were to redirect those DEA agents on quality control and making sure that our medical cannabis industry is protected from intrusion. I mean, that's what it means to protect interstate commerce, is to make sure that your product coming from California makes it to this patient in Virginia without being molested and without being counterfeited, without being, you know, stopped along the way by Idaho police or whatever.
And then will you share what you put in the text?
Yes. The brief history. I helped create an organization called Americans for Safe Access. Okay. Americans for Safe Access we created when our friend Ed Rosenthal was busted and was going to court. I was one of those recalcitrant 7 who said, fuck you in federal court. I am not convicting my friend. ASA out of that created what became the Rohrabacher Amendment, which is now the Blumenauer Amendment. And so if you have a medical necessity, and in states where medical marijuana is legal, the federal government cannot spend money to send any of their people to court to fight you because they cannot spend any money doing so. So the case that I was dealing with, Berkeley Patients Group was one of 3 that was forcefully evicted back in 2012 by the federal government. We moved to a new location. They came after us because we were now within 1,000 feet of a daycare center. And of course, that's not part of the law. We sued them. And after 4 years in court, the government had to throw in the towel because they could not afford to send in a lawyer to actually fight the case. And they initially offered me limited immunity, and we sent it back over the table, and I won full immunity. So what I do as a medical provider has been fucking legal since 2016. So as long as the Rohrabacher Amendment, I mean the Blumenauer Amendment continues, there's no way they can send any federal or spend any federal money in court taking anybody to any cases, period, end of story. So that's why.
Interesting. Yes, everyone feel free to jump in, folks.
For the home grower with 6 plants, it's not about the feds, it's about local ordinances. And as long as the feds don't control what local ordinances can do, they can set ridiculous rules and regulations which practically make it impossible for patients to grow their own. From the 10 by 10 area with 6 plants, which 1 plant can take up that area if you know how to grow. It's just not just and not proper what the local ordinances are allowed to do. So to you folks up there who have access to lawmaking and making, you know, suggestions on the federal level, I want you all to understand that the federal level is not what's killing us. It's the local level that makes the regulations that can do like $1,000 per plant per day fees to where poor people lose their homes. The new jail isn't going to jail or prison, it's losing your home from fees and regulations through the local ordinances. So I just wanted to point that out because
this is where it takes, this is where people in the state have to get active and work in Sacramento. Our focus is trying to help our veterans at the national and international level. And so we understand that reality, but this is where we need people to actively participate in their democracy because you need to be working at the local level. I mean, I work in the city of Berkeley, so I work within my city council. Anything within Alameda County, I work with that. Outside of that, I'm within Sacramento. So we need to think regionally, we need to think locally, and attend the meetings and be participants in our democracy. Otherwise, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah, I do try to do what I can and have meetings with senators and their assistants and whatnot and try to make change however I can. But yeah, I agree.
If you don't mind, let me, if you can hold your thought, wait for a second, let me reply to that real quick. I think that your intervention brings up a couple of very valid points. First off, is something we haven't talked about, it's worth mentioning. something that we've discussed within our action council is the need for a constitutional amendment to protect your right to grow a plant. And it doesn't, and it shouldn't be just for a cannabis plant. It should be your right to grow any plant, that there isn't some overriding concern of the public. It put the ball back in their court to prove that there's some, public safety need to prevent you from growing the plant. Think about some maybe genetically altered, spiny nettle or something that you don't want out there. But anyway,
life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, some basics that we're supposed to be allowed. As long as we're doing no harm, I don't see how that can even.
Yeah, I mean, remember what I was saying about the constitutional importance of constitutional provisions at the international level. Well, when Bolivia was working on legalizing coca, the first thing that they did, and you're talking about coca now, coca heritage, coca chewing, coca, not cocaine, coca. And coca, they went to the UN, they tried to change the law. I thought that was very valiant of them. So you have to basically move the mountain. They tried, at least gave it an effort, went back home. First thing they did was they changed their constitution to give the citizens of Bolivia the right locally within the country to grow coca. Then they went back and they withdrew from the treaty and reapplied to the treaty with a reservation. Remember those reservations I was talking about? And then all they had to do was have a simple vote of the member states to get back in. And they were able to do that. The hardline anti-drug countries like Russia and China and others weren't enough countries to prevent them from reapplying with this new reservation. So now coca is very much legal in Bolivia in a way that I think should be a pattern for us to follow in the United States for cannabis. That's number one. And then number two, I think that it really, to maybe echo what Etienne was saying, there's so much to be done at the state level. You need the state laws have to recognize medical use and have to recognize that medical use includes growing plants, and that you can grow 6 or 8 or 12 or 16 or 24 plants or whatever seems reasonable in your state that patients can grow, or no number at all, just maybe under square footage like the DEA does, the amount of canopy of cannabis that you're allowed. And that's it. As a patient, you're allowed to have this certain amount of canopy and it's protected. You do that, and then all of a sudden you have the federal government protecting your weed in your yard from the state.
I'd like to jump in for a second. This is Wade. To this question of local control and really restrictive ordinances and high fines and all that. In my work here in Nevada County, what I found again and again is a lot of that very restrictive language is fear-based, and it's based on the fact that Schedule 1 for cannabis meant that the feds could come and mess with county government. And anyway, back to the topic of the day, rescheduling and descheduling would profoundly, I think, change the tone of the conversation at the local and state level across the country. That's all I
agree. I've had lots of years of conversation with our local sheriff, and that's every time. He's like, I don't want to put anyone, growing weed in jail. I don't want to, but I have to follow the law. And that I have the same hope. I thank you, Wade, for saying that, because I hope that's what it is. I think it's going to take time because there's such deep stigmas, but it's just been looming in so many of these conversations. Well, it's not federal. Well, it's not federal. Michael, and you just brought this up too around the Constitution and changing all of that. Is that something that can really, it seems so hard to even get folks to listen about the human rights and constitutional aspects of this conversation. I feel like it's the most powerful position to lobby from, because then all of a sudden we're not talking about just us as cannabis advocates. We're now talking about every American in the United States.
Yeah, I've always been.
Wait, hold on, Michael. Sorry.
1 second, Michael. So we explored constitutional challenge. In fact, we have two. And we did this for the simple fact is we looked at Canada, okay? We looked at what Canada has, and Canada has a veterans access to cannabis, AVAC, where they actually provide free cannabis to their veterans. So we studied Canada because we want what their Canadian veterans have. For if you have 100% disability, you get free 3 grams per day mailed to you, whichever modality you want, within 48 hours by the National Post Office. Awesome. So we looked at Canada and how Canada changed its law, and it had a series of basically constitutional challenges through the courts that were eventually combined into one. And the courts heard it, their Supreme Court heard it and said, you know what? Canadians have a constitutional right to cannabis. So we looked at it ourselves here domestically, and we were in touch with a constitutional lawyer, and we presented our cases to her, and she said, yes. You don't have one, you have 2 constitutional cases, because the uniqueness of veterans and cannabis culture, regardless, we had 2 arguments. The reality, she says, is it's going to take 10 to 12 years to finally go through the courts to arrive at settled law. That's going to take millions of dollars, 10 to 12 lawyers realistically to take that all the way through those 10 to 12 years. They felt that there will be legislative remedies well before that arrives. However, we still feel the outlier, there possibly still needs to be somebody to take up a constitutional challenge, so it becomes the dangling thing in the back of the throat that becomes the inevitable that became, and what happened with Canada. It became inevitable because the law changed, because the constitutional change arrived, because it was heard. We're not even close to that. And that's, as we stated, 10 to 12 years down the line, if you have an injured party, which we could be, but we can't find, because again, we are leaderless and we don't do money. So to come up with, 10 to $20 million to pay lawyers to go through all that is an impossible task, right? But it doesn't mean that another group or a collection of groups couldn't pull together resources and ideas and actually do have that constitutional challenge, so that the local ordinances would be moot, right? Because we're all protected. So until we do that and have that protection, we're always going to be fighting locally. So I'll acquiesce and get off my soapbox. Michael Krawitz.
Yeah, it's a good explanation. Yeah, this is in addition to that, or on a little bit different subject matter, of the idea of actually creating a new constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment would be a act of Congress that would then have to be ratified in the states. And it's literally everyone, every citizen in the United States will in some way participate in a constitutional amendment process. I don't know whether the last time there was a discussion about a constitutional amendment was the ERA. The ERA discussion was very interesting, the legalistics of that discussion. It was something that was put on the table very, very long time ago, and the time period to finish the collecting of the signatures or whatever was required at the state level had passed. They finally did reach that quota. So it shows you, it's I guess bringing up that example shows you it's a big challenge to amend the United States Constitution. But I think that such an action would be really interesting to see who would work on it. And if you were talking about making a plant a constitutional right, being able to grow a plant, and you wrote the language, you'd have to get like a poet to write the language so that it clearly applied to all the different facets of what we would want to say about our love for the connection between humans and plants. And I think that would be generally engaging. I think that with medical cannabis, we're at like 90-something% on national polls support. On adult rec, we're like 60 to 70% support on adult on polls. I think if you were to do a poll on a better way to put it, actually, in Vienna, in Austria, in our meetings of the non-government organizations, we go face to face a lot with our nemesis, Kevin Sabet, with Project Smart, the smart approaches to marijuana, the standard bearer for prohibition of marijuana in the United States. And you get to meet him and hang out with him face to face if you go to the UN with us. And he was sitting there when one of our new organizations that we got accredited at the UN first arrived and said their name at this non-government organization meeting, Fields of Green for All. And Fields of Green for All is our group working out of South Africa, and is the little engine that could. This little non-governmental organization from South Africa is part of our leadership of our international delegation representing cannabis for planet Earth. And it is because we are the only organization, Fields of Green for All, that's accredited at the UN, whose main mission is cannabis, the only one. There's thousands of NGOs that are accredited. Think like Salvation Army, Red Cross, and Fields of Green for All. Anyway, when they first said their name at this meeting, Kevin Sabet said, "Wow, that's a good name. Look, Fields of Green for All. Who wouldn't want that? I would." And he wasn't kidding. I mean, he was like, talking about it like almost, he was amongst his friends. I just happened to be sitting right in the middle of him and like several of his prohibitionist friends. And he wasn't saying it very sarcastically. He really kind of got a kick out of the name, and was sort of recognizing that the cannabis people had come up with a good one, in his own way. But it was his own vote, his little vote, that Fields of Green for All is something that I think would poll very, very high, like in the high 90%. Even, people that
As a
are
campaign.
on one side or the other, of all kinds of environmental issues and everything else, when it comes right down to it, they love going to the park and sitting in the trees and enjoying the green. So
Fields of Green. So we're like way past our normal time, which is fine, but I want to kind of like bring us to a close a little bit. What do you see, as we move forward? It seems like after hearing everything you've said that there's a lot of support, and that rescheduling is a step towards descheduling. But, we have a lot of people who have invested in this recreational market. What do you see that the steps are as they navigate all this local chaos to ensure that because really the biggest inspiration for anyone who's growing weed right now in the legal market is here in these rural communities, is the hope for the ability to send it to France, to send it to New York, to send it, like you guys mentioned. If we go to Schedule 3, like, what does that rollout look like? Where do activists need to put, because there's so little time, energy, and money in these marketplaces right now. Where is a good place to put that focus besides the local concerns?
Well, I think it's a great question. The landscape right now is not going to change. I mean, I don't expect any immediate change. So, anybody who's out there that's talking about, huge monumental things that are going to happen immediately, I think it's going to be a day where everybody's going to be like waiting for the big loud explosion that doesn't happen. There's just no big loud explosion. But having said that, investors and people with big money don't plan on what's happening today or yesterday. They plan on what's happening yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And they're definitely going to see the writing on the wall. What you need to look at, like the numbers, and we looked at this eons ago because, it is what it is. Medicinal cannabis is a tiny market. If you look at medicinal cannabis versus the adult rec market, maybe 2/10 or something like that of the adult rec market, if you're generous. In a state like California, I don't even know if those numbers would hold up. It's a big state. But anyway, in other states, probably 1/10 to 2/10 is my estimate, and that's where the heads are at of these big industry types. That their money is being put into where they think the biggest market is. But if you got a bigger market of a single state with adult rec, how does that compare to a multi-state operation with medical? And where would it be worth more to start putting more money into medical given this scenario today? And all of a sudden you have what's real today and what's promised tomorrow. And if this scenario unfolds the way I described it, you're going to have rescheduling happen while we're still talking about descheduling. That makes rescheduling real and descheduling a proposal, what could happen. And they're always going to react to, what is happening much more than what could be happening. So I think that's going to change their arithmetic a little bit on, maybe their future investments, maybe not. I mean, I think that I've always thought that the big money, you're talking like Altria or whatever, they're undaunted by anything we do. They're already looking at projected markets, after legalization, of their own 2/10, because that's what they get, right? 2 or 3/10 of the market share for their big Budweiser of weed product. We're not competing with that. The small growers aren't competing with that. The craft growers aren't competing with that. The medical cannabis community, for the most part, isn't competing with that, because for the most part, medical cannabis consumers aren't looking for the Budweiser of cannabis. They're looking for something specific to them that works, that's produced under a medical cannabis program that has higher standards than your typical beer or cigarette national standards. So there's some reconciling to do both ways there, where I think the federal standards are insufficient compared to what we've created in the states in some cases. So it's what I talked about before is a two-way road. So anyway, to back to the reality at hand, I think that nothing's going to change immediately, but the math in the minds of the big money could start changing. And I think, the wisdom of some people like your governor there in California that, I believe just signed into law a state PAC agreement. That stuff's going to become front and center news and very, very interesting, because if you can set it up where you got a state PAC between two states, one that's got a glut of weed and the other one that's got a glut of patients with no weed or insufficient quality of weed, I think that's a match made in heaven from the industry perspective. And like you said before, and I'll reiterate it, I think the future and the hope of small craft growers, the people that can grow a really important niche product that might be incredibly important for a small number of medical cannabis patients that benefit only from that particular variety or that source of material, those people are going to be spread out throughout the country and around the world. If you have access to them, you can have a pretty big business to supply their needs. Marinol, the THC drug that's approved by the FDA, has a tiny market share, but it has a huge profit share because it's an expensive little drug that a lot of people use. It's just, tiny in the market, but it's very profitable. So,
right. Like if you're able to produce a really unique profile that, has a strong medical impact is what you're saying, then that's a huge opportunity there. I see that. Anyone before we move forward? So if anybody to support this conversation, you guys want to go to Veterans Action Council, and you can reach out to them at veteransactioncouncil@gmail.com. And these guys work a lot of the way we work from our communities, which is collaboratively, collectively, and through sharing. So support is always welcomed, I'm sure. And you guys have most tonight. You have who do you have in your meeting tonight? And it'll be on Facebook Live, right? Is it Morgan Fox, I think?
Yes, we have Morgan Fox tonight on our BAC roundtable. It'll be on at 4:10, which is 7:10 Eastern Standard Time. So, yes.
Right on. Now, for the group, you guys, Michael and I have been, we've mentioned human rights a couple times in this discussion. I've put together an outline. Michael came to me and suggested that we do a white paper on human rights and cannabis. And so I've kind of put together a rough sketch, and Michael's going to check that out. And then I'm going to ask Brian Hill to kind of check it out. And then I'd like to, if it's okay with everyone here, like we did with the white paper on the auction, open it up to everybody to contribute, say, no, this is wrong, when you're missing something. And then I was thinking it would be really cool to, when we were done with it and ready, to open it up for stories, like create a way for people to put their personal stories of how they were, their human rights have been impacted by the drug war, by legalization. You know, when we get the paper done, we'll understand how to articulate that better. But I think having a structured document first, because when I created a survey, gosh, I guess it was like 4 years ago for the commission here in Humboldt County. And well, first of all, the personal stories are incredibly impactful, but a lot of folks that have gone through the drug war don't really understand how their human rights have been violated. So if we first put a really good document together that shows these ways, then I think it'll help people bring their own stories to the table. And when we have this document, then all of us have something to send out to all the powers that be. And I'm hoping, you know, we'll have some good partners on it. I mean, we already do, obviously, but and get it out there so we can kind of shift the conversation, not just from the taxation and regulation, but how this is actually impacting the communities and the people, and maybe help push things in a direction that we all talked about. This would be, I think, I don't know, a great beginning to the conversation around the constitutional rights and plant rights and things like that. And there are other organizations out there right now that are working on, not around cannabis specifically, but that plants have their own rights. You know, they're part of humanity as well. That I think we could get a lot more partners on this conversation long game. Any questions? Anybody want to look at it now? I just get shy about it until people have looked at things, but you're all welcome to check it out. If you don't, you'll be seeing it soon. And just like we did with the auction, the Legacy Project white paper, we'll just open it up to make sure that it's a real inclusive voice around human rights and cannabis. All right. Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you. It was an amazing history lesson. Oh, I can't wait to go back and edit the video and put it on YouTube. Because it really, I mean, I learned a lot about how we got to where we are in that whole conversation. And I'm one of those people who really, I thought rescheduling it, put it in pharma's hands because of all the drugs and how it's regulated. But after hearing this, I feel like, oh, well, it can be adjusted for cannabis. And that's what we really need to put our support in, is making sure that it's done properly, not just blanketly.
Yeah, you know, I'll say that when we went up to Congress and we looked at bills, especially Congressional Representative Mace from South Carolina, the bill to deschedule cannabis, all of the bills generally, but especially that one, which we liked a lot, relies on the state medical cannabis programs. With under descheduling, the way that cannabis is entered into medicine is in her bill is fairly straightforward, sort of grandfathering in of all the stuff that we have under our medical cannabis programs. So that's one thought process, you could say, or one way that we might reconcile these things and find ourselves all on the same road at some point.
It would be really interesting to like, and I know you're really busy, but to have like, what are all those different bills and actions happening around that? I mean, you mentioned a few significant ones that make the rescheduling work. And there was a couple, like you said, it's like a potluck, it's all these pieces. Well, what are those pieces? So when our trade associations and our lobbyist groups are going in California, we all, instead of having, we're so myopic in this industry. If we can see how we can weave all that together, then we can support each other better in it and maybe end up with a really beautiful quilt instead of a chaotic mess.
Well, yeah, absolutely happy to do that. And just so you know, I mean, that's sort of almost exactly like what we're working on the flip side of legalization, thinking that, gosh, it would be great if we could think about some of this stuff with regard to the drug control treaty and how we're going to reconcile this after legalization, because for a lot of the congressional reps, that's just ... There's no real thought process that's gone on what that all means. And again, the real strength of the product that you've got, from my perspective as a cannabis connoisseur and a patient, is the really great products that you're talking about that are coming out of the the northern part of California, especially. Those products will have, like I said, a spread out appeal throughout the United States and the world. So if you can't reach those consumers around the world, then you're being deprived of your constitutional rights as a citizen, small business owner and business person in the United States. And I really see this as, levels of sovereignty. And state has been fighting very diligently on our behalf over in Vienna on cannabis policy, and the movement doesn't know anything about it. And the fight that's going on in Vienna on cannabis for the world is completely disconnected from what we're doing in Congress. And, on a certain level, it should be, because it's our laws and it doesn't have anything to do with the treaty. What we pass is what we pass. The treaty gets fixed afterwards, not before. But the thing is, yeah, there are implications about what we're doing, and we're trying to enter into a world stage of this cannabis. The cannabis appellations and stuff that are being pioneered in California, I'm hoping will be somewhat of a pilot project really for the world, and that indigenous peoples around the world will be able to take their local produce, their super special cannabis varieties that are specific to a certain terroir, and be able to get international protection, be able to put it on the shelf right next to California, northern California, and the best out of Thailand or whatever right next to it. Oh, I guess I can't even say that without saying that I just watched a special on Thailand on TV where they're getting flooded with stuff that's not able to be sold legally in California anymore. So where like some of this stuff that's rolling off the shelf in California is wind up flooding the shelves, and the United States government isn't really policing that like they should. Like if that was fentanyl going there to they'd be all happy to bust everybody's heads, but it's nice California seals and government looking boxes, and they just let it go right through on FedEx and leave it up to the Thai police to handle it. So yeah, there's complaints that could be had about our U.S. government that don't even affect us as U.S. citizens that are relevant to our position. I think we really need to be looking at this as a world people that require this medicine, and that's a world resource. It's a natural and beautiful, beloved resource of California. California is a resource in the United States, and the entire thing is a resource to the human race and to the world. That's my opinion.
Sticking to it. Peggy, do you want to share what you shared in the chat before we sign off?
Sure. Honestly, when you sit and think about everything and look at the bigger picture, in my honest opinion, I believe that this is just a big plan B for Big Pharma, because they're afraid that when everybody finds out cannabis heals, that it's going to make their plans fall through. And so they're trying to get ahead of the curve and say, no, we got to regulate. We need to medicate. No, if we could get hospitals to test by putting cannabis in foods, And if it actually started helping people get better, then we could prove that cannabis is supposed to be part of our diet and does not need to be regulated at all. What they're trying to do is make a plan B for when big pharma goes and collapses. They're wanting to have their money. And so that's why they're trying to regulate everything and push for regulations on testing and everything else. That's just my honest opinion. It goes with the farming industry as well. We don't test trees for their arsenic levels before we send them to get cut up for paper or furniture. So why are we doing that with the cannabis hemp products for that type of stuff? So to me, it seems like this is all just more money schemes being played. That's just my opinion.
It's fear. It's all these decisions based on fear, right? And that you never make a good decision based on fear.
They're keeping away from KISS, which we're taught in the military, which is keep it simple, stupid. They're overcomplicating everything and putting rules and regulations, making it more complicated, and they're trying to segregate and degrade everything, and they're going to make it all collapse again if we don't do this correctly and get ahead of it before it's too late.
Thank you. Anyone else, any last words before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to say that I was enlightened with today's conversation and fear the descheduling a little less, hoping that it will eventually lead to, the rescheduling, hopefully it'll eventually lead to descheduling. But I do fear what will happen to all the non-medical that have spent so much, creating what they've created. Although I've always believed cannabis was for medical and for patients. And, maybe that's where it should have stayed for a while until they figured it all out and started profiting from it and keeping people in jail for profiting from it. So,
yeah, and so unfortunately, so many people but a lot of people who provided medicine went into legalization to continue to be legit and there weren't options, right? So we just it gets frustrating, but
what happened? You see, the Prop 64, people didn't really read it and they thought it was legalization when it was tax and regulation. And from that, what we got was overregulation, which basically created a non-medical system because co-ops were no longer allowed in California. And that's where most of the patients got their medicines. So it's just really important that we bring back the value of the patient. So I actually think that's amazing. And then hopefully we can eventually, go back to a regulated market for non-medical as well. But I see this as an interesting point in time where I hope it leads to a lot of patients having access to medicine. So.
Thank you, Andra.
I'd like to say one more thing, if you don't mind. I said earlier that I would at least talk about a consensus point. That's a hanging chad in the back of my brain. So I'll say that before we close, that there is absolute consensus that the DEA would be screwing us if they go to Schedule 2 instead of Schedule 3. I mean, that's not something that the cannabis reform movement has considered. Not broadly. The information that you've been given today is all behind the scenes. The only organization that I know of in their seminars and presentations, out of the dozens that I've witnessed in mainstream and in our reform community, only one organization, and I'll mention that name because they're outstanding, and that's the International Cannabis Bar Association, has done a phenomenal job of covering this and keeping up with it. But other than that, no one else that I saw mentioned anything about Schedule 2 and, the trap that the DEA is in, the treaty, requirements, and, the possibility that they could, screw us yet again with, Schedule 2 versus Schedule 3. That's somewhat, you could call it almost behind the scenes information. But it's important, I think you'll agree, to understand what's really at stake here in this moment and how even Schedule 3 is not a given. It's a fight to get it. And a good fight. And I'll leave you with two things, one good and one bad, as far as Schedule 3 and what that would mean for Congress and our descheduling fight. On the bad side, there is a remote possibility that Schedule 3 will be a lot more comfortable than people think it would be. And all of a sudden there'll be a decrease in the amount of impetus for funding for our reform organizations to make the fight that's going to be needed to make on descheduling. That's a possibility. It's not a possibility, winning and having, that was what we were up against in Amsterdam. Like, it was legal. So it was hard to get people to get, put any effort, energy into fighting for marijuana when it was already legal, even though I was watching the walls close in on these people. I was like the, proverbial bird in the coal mine. So, but anyway, on the other side of it, Schedule 3 is certainly, I asked the folks that are working on Capitol Hill basically one simple question. All right, today you're working on descheduling. You got a descheduling bill, and you're meeting with reps to fight for this. We're in the future or next year or whatever. Is it going to be easier or harder for you to do your job today with Schedule 3 in your back pocket or Schedule 1 in your back pocket? Because Schedule 3 is like halfway up the ladder trying to do this shit versus from the ground on Schedule 1. Because the federal government, their proclivity is to just say, well, it's illegal under federal law for it even to be a medicine. It says in the federal law under Schedule 1, it's very unique to just Schedule 1. It's unique in the treaty and in the United States. That classification in our Schedule 1 is unique in the world, as far as I know, where it says that Schedule 1 has no accepted medical value. There's nothing in the treaty that talks about, oh, you shouldn't use this, it has no accepted medical value. In the treaty, they talk about dangerous, they talk about more dangerous, talk about less dangerous, they talk about shit that, maybe you should put over the counter, stuff that maybe you shouldn't put over the counter. That's how the treaty talks. And also the treaty talks about exemptions for hemp, exemptions for adult rec. These things are actually spoken of in the treaty. Those are very straightforward. It's well within the knowledge of our team, these things. But yeah, the reality of Schedule 3 and what that's going to mean in terms of descheduling is going to be real for these folks. And I think that's not to be underestimated. It's a leg up. So
Well,
let me say one last thing.
Go ahead. Sorry, Michael.
I just want to say something about the corporations. I agree with Peggy. If you parse what she said and parse what I said, we said the same thing, which is that, inevitably we see a future where these big controlling interests play a very, very large, maybe outsized role. And we agree that we need to fight as hard as we can to make sure that those policies aren't implemented in some sort of overarching way, as they can be when money gets to control politics. The only thing that can stop money from controlling politics is people, because money can't buy people. And we can put people in the way of money. It's a very easy arithmetic that we've done in the reform community. But I will say this about the word they. And since I was a little kid, anytime anybody says the word they, I'm always triggered. It's not usually the case. There usually is no they. It's just a bunch of us. When I went to the UN, I broke down the earth into little pieces and looked for stakeholders. Some of those stakeholders were large corporate, conglomerate, pharmaceutical industry reps. And some of them were farmers on a little tiny farm in a little tiny country that is developing. So be it. Those are the stakeholders, and we're all in this together. And if you can look at it that way, I think then you're one step closer to helping me work on this to fix this on a global scale.
Nice, thank you. Will we as a cannabis activist community, when they're in that decision making between the reschedule and between 3 and 2, is that something that could literally just happen out of nowhere? Is there what can we as a community do around that?
What we're planning on doing is pretty straightforward. This week I had the ability to run this by our thought leaders on the subject, and it apparently we're exactly on the same page. So I'm pretty emboldened to talk about it, in a very real way, not just hypothetical. I mean, the DEA will issue its ruling, its proposed rule making, and they'll open up like a 60-day comment period. And I encourage everyone to prepare to comment. Like I said, for us, it's easy. If they go with Schedule 3, they don't break history, they go with the HHS recommendation, they get a short letter from Veterans Action Council that says, thanks for your diligence and, following the evidence base. Look forward to an ongoing better relationship with you. Thankfully, BAC. But if they go with Schedule 2, then I when I was talking about Schedule 3 being potentially, like diminishing the amount of fundraising that might be available for descheduling, that's real. I mean, it's hypothetical and it's small, but if they go to Schedule 2, the outcry is going to be huge, not hypothetical. I mean, I can't even imagine it. And for that reason, I'm not even sure like where I'm at. Like usually in our international work is very, very simple. We work from the consensus and everything's just completely open source. But right now I'm like, other than this, we're not really putting a heck of a lot of effort into educating everybody and correcting everybody and being out there to, answer all the questions out there. There's an ample number of people out there that know the CSA well enough to give you the breakdown, the history of the Controlled Substances Act schedules and what the 1, 2, 3, and 4 mean, the basics of it. So we're pretty comfortable that people understand the basics of it. They're just being misled on the periphery, on the top edges, on the advanced stuff, like I said. And when you look at that advanced stuff, it basically comes down to a very simple question. Does the DEA do the right thing or not? If they don't, then be prepared for a Schedule 2 and what that would mean in terms of how you would want to address that, what you would want to say to the DEA in your comment and what other actions you might want to take. Because we're very seriously, trying to draft the language now that would capture the injury that would be done by Schedule 2 versus Schedule 3. We think we can articulate that, which would be a requirement of a legal standing in a fight against the DEA in administrative court. That's what we're looking at.
So there'll be time between that decision when they put their decision out for public comment. And so people really need to participate in that is what it sounds like.
Yeah,
we'll make sure.
When we had call for comment twice during the World Health Organization process that we did, and in our connected to our Vienna work, that we did through normal actually, and we got over 250,000 participants that sent in comment. So that's very appropriate time to submit comment, but they're only going to give you like 60 days. So that's for us. We like to try to work ahead as much as we can. So this is a very serious contingency. There's other contingencies as well. They're just not likely at all, not likely enough to warrant our time or our thought.
All right. Well, please make sure that this group knows when it's time to make comment if we don't know on our own.
You'll know. Everybody will know. It'll literally be front page news on everything you look at.
Should be, huh? All right, you guys. Well, thank you everyone for your time and energy and brains. Next week, I think Elijah's going to come and walk us through his data program. And we'll have an update on the digital production aspect of things, and maybe an update. We might have even an update on the skunk, because MOCA is, I think they're going to be harvesting in the next month. The first batch of those skunk 1 number 3, or the skunk 1 number 1s, the one with the 6 variants in the allele that are really unique. So hopefully we'll know where folks can go try it. I don't know yet, but we'll find out. It's going to be really small batched. And then Elijah also has a survey that we might use to try to get the consumers who do try it, so we can not just have the production data, but have the consumer data for Michael when we design the auction. All right, you guys. John, I saw you pop in. Do you want to say hi and give us any updates in Trinity County? I would be interested to hear that. I have a few extra minutes.
Yeah, hi everybody. It has been a while since I've been able to tune in. Trinity County update. Our cannabis division, our planning department continues to move through the re-licensing process, including the Appendix C CEQA component. They're about halfway through the existing pile. So it's been about 3 years that our county was gridlocked on license renewals from a lawsuit and such. But over the course of the last 12 months or so, new staff, newly invigorated, and a new checklist style CEQA document has been working pretty good. They're getting through anywhere from 2 to 6 of them a week. We've got a grand total of about 430 total applicants from the prior program, and they've been able to get about 200, a little 100 of them through the whole process and into annual licensing at this point. So that part's great, but there's still hundreds more that await their turn in line. The fires were short-lived here in Trinity, so there was a little bit of smoke for a couple weeks, but we got really nice rain on them and quieted them down a lot to hopefully not have smoke taint on Trinity's product this coming year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been a stunning seed grow season, aside from that brief smoke. We've had really nice mild weather and very chilly nights and cloudless skies, aside from that brief smoke. This rescheduling conversation, super important to Trinity. We've had a lot of federal attention over the years. Our local law enforcement relies heavily on the schedule argument on all things cannabis. So, I think it's looked at by most Trinity folks as a double-edged sword. Most folks were really pleased that Prop 19 did not pass in California. And I don't know, what was it, 2012? That would have been essentially Schedule 2 in California. Hopefully this Schedule 3 is a meaningful stepping stone toward the liberalization that we all want to see. But that remains to be seen. Michael's conversation was super interesting. I was in and out of listening. Maybe if Michael's still on, or somebody could answer this question for me, just to clarify, because I missed a lot of it. I just want to make sure I've got this straight.
Yeah.
Is something administrative that the executive branch can do. But it takes an act of Congress to ratify a change to an international treaty. Is that kind of in line with most of what was just being said?
You sort of abridged it a little bit. So the executive branch has it well within its authority. And, think about who's in the executive branch: the FDA, HHS, DEA, Justice Department, Attorney General. That's all part of the executive branch. It's well within their scope, given that authority by law from the Controlled Substances Act, to do these scheduling determinations back and forth, up and down, whatever they think, based on evidence, based on treaty change. It's all written in our national law, our federal law. Our Controlled Substances Act dictates that the executive branch has that authority and will do those things, specifically naming the Attorney General, but the Attorney General has delegated that authority to the DEA. It's all on the up and up. But if you want to actually remove cannabis from schedule, like, the executive branch can change it, sort of laterally from one schedule to another. And they can do so, based on those criteria. But if you want to remove it from the schedule, rewrite the federal law, remove cannabis from all the criminal sanctions and everything that is connected to, and all that shit, which is a mired mess, you need to change the Controlled Substance Act. You need to fundamentally rewrite the federal law. And only the president signs that into law, but only the Congress, writes and passes the law. Is that clear?
Michael, do you know if it would require a super majority of Congress or a simple majority?
Just a regular, it's just regular business. It's just regular passage of laws. There's no, they're not passing a new treaty or anything like that to change the Controlled Substances Act. As I understand it, it would just be regular law. And it's something that could have been done already. That we've been told by these leaders, like when the Democratic Party, who had, the leadership was signed on to the bill. You know, we had the Senate leadership, and you know, even our vice president now sitting, the United States had her own bill, you know, in this stack. So we've had some very high-ranking people in the Democratic Party, and still they would tell us, "Oh, well, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. There's existential things we're trying to deal with right now. We'll get to you, we'll get to you." So we've been getting the "we'll get to you, we'll get to you" for a while from Congress, from well-meaning people that are on our side. So when the people that aren't on our side are in control, as it is in the House right now, it's very problematic, very difficult to get things moved. So that's why any bill in Congress is seen as, you know, hypothetical until we can get shit resolved. We haven't passed anything in a long time. The last thing we passed was a Cannabis Research Act, and it went under the radar of most of the cannabis people that Kevin Sabet, our nemesis, actually had a role in writing that and planted some landmines for us. So even though we're rescheduling cannabis, ostensibly, there's still going to be hurdles that we have to face because of this new stupid law that Kevin Sabet got us to fall prey to. That was signed by the president. It's the only thing on cannabis that I know of for quite a while that's been signed by the president. And it seems like, what do you call that? A Trojan horse bill.
Right.
Ouch.
And but we are coming into this fresh election cycle, and perhaps the Biden administration wants to motivate younger voters somehow. And you know, maybe this is the moment we see some real action on the federal front. So,
well,
stepping stone.
You have to, you know, kind of look at what the president said in light of politics. Certainly, he's looking at this process, and he, you know, President Biden, Joe Biden, Senator Biden was like our nemesis before Kevin Sabet got out of diapers.
Agreed.
And he actually
wrote in the 90s.
Yeah, he wrote
90s.
some of the most egregious laws. He wrote laws that put us in the position as the United States having the highest per capita incarceration rate of the world, and makes us embarrassed, you know, in the world stage, and actually probably is guilty through that connection to human rights violations and war crimes in that war on drugs that he helped create. So he's got a long ways to go to make amends for anything that he's ever done. But, you know, bless his heart, he got up there when he said he was going to run for president and said he would do just this. He actually said he would go to Schedule 2. And hopefully we, you know, convinced him not to mention Schedule 2 when he sent it over to the AG. You'll notice that difference in that language.
Maybe it's time to dust off those old anti-Schedule 2 arguments from the Prop 19 era and get them back into this comment period.
Yeah. And you know, just one last thought, so you know why I brought up that whole thought on Biden. I mean, hell, you know, he was there. He wrote this federal law. He wrote a lot of the shit that we're been bucking and losing against and fighting against and losing for decades. He wrote that shit. If anybody knows how to navigate this thing behind the scenes and, you know, what to do in the right time, if he wanted this as a political thing to hit before the election, then when he did it and said it, he knew that timeline. You know what I mean? You can't give him any room for not knowing this shit. He knew. He knows.
No, he's
exactly
a great technocrat.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, thank you for all your advocacy. It's been a long-term thing. I've been hearing and seeing your work for a long time. It's awesome that folks have been continuing to carry the medical torch through this weird transition era the last few years, when most of the medical and Prop 215 era spirit has been bypassed. It's possibly the most rewarding part of all of this. And anyway, thank you.
Thank you, John, for being such good heart and bringing in the Trinity vibe. All right, you guys, we're rocking and rolling. I got to go get on another call, but I really appreciate everyone showing up and having these conversations. I will get this on YouTube over the weekend. So I think if we could all share this, I think there was so much value spoken that a lot of people need to hear. It's 4:20, right on. Right, we ended right when we needed to for you, Michael. That's awesome. All right, you guys, blessings.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.
You too, Sandra.
Thank you.